Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Yes, welcome.
This is the show where we take a deep dive into the ideas, texts, and histories that completely shape our world, even if we don't realize it.
Right, especially the ones we don't realize.
Exactly. And so I want you to just think about the pressure you feel when you wake up in the morning. Like before your feet even hit the floor, you know?
Oh, yeah, the checklist.
Right, the mental checklist is just waiting for you.
Huh.
You have to be productive at your job. You have to be this incredibly attentive friend or partner.
You got to hit the gym.
Yeah, maintain your health, curate your social media presence, and somehow carve out time to be a morally upright citizen in this totally chaotic world.
It is exhausting.
It really is.
Yeah.
We live in an era that defines us entirely by what we do. Like your value is completely hopelessly tangled up in your output. If you are producing, well, then you matter.
And if you aren't producing, you just fall behind.
You become obsolete. It is this relentless, just exhausting metric.
It is. And, we tend to think of this performance anxiety as a modern phenomenon.
For sure. We blame the internet.
Right. We blame the internet or capitalism or hustle culture. We just assume that if we could, rewind the clock a few thousand years, things were just simpler.
People just sitting around in togas eating grapes.
Exactly. But the stack of research you sent us for this deep dive today completely proves otherwise.
It really does. And I have to be honest, when I first saw the request for this deep dive, you sent us this incredibly dense, multi-volume linguistic analysis.
Kittle's Theological Dictionary of the New Testament.
Right, Kittle's.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked us to trace just one ancient Greek word family through, centuries of history. And I thought, okay, doing a whole deep dive on a dictionary entry sounds incredibly dry.
It does sound like a grammar lecture.
It really does. Because usually looking up a word is utilitarian, You want to know the Spanish word for water, you get your translation, and you just move on.
You don't spend an hour on it.
Right. But this is different. You asked us to look at the Greek verb poiēs.
Which just simply means to do or to make.
Yeah, to do or to make. Along with its noun forms, poiēma, which is workmanship or creation, and poietēs, meaning maker or doer.
Basic vocabulary.
Super basic.
Yeah.
Functional. But okay, let's unpack this, because tracing these words from classical Greek philosophy straight through the Old Testament and into the New Testament, it exposes this massive tectonic fault line in the human psyche.
It maps the entire history of how humanity understands its relationship with the divine. I mean, it is literally a battleground of worldviews.
It is.
Through these texts, we can watch two completely incompatible ideas just violently collide.
Yeah, a total head-on collision.
Right. On one side, you have this philosophical view of a God who merely, fashions pre-existing materials, and a humanity that feels, well, perfectly capable of earning its own way.
They think they can do it.
They do. And on the other side, you have the biblical revelation of a God who creates the very fabric of reality out of absolute nothingness.
Which is wild.
And then, alongside that, a humanity that slowly and honestly agonizingly realizes that its own doing, its own poiē, is utterly bankrupt.
It is bankrupt. So let's just start at the very beginning of that collision, right? Because when the ancient Greeks looked up at the night sky, they saw order.
They did.
They saw the constellations moving predictably. They saw the seasons changing right on schedule. And they naturally asked, well, who made this?
Or, to use our word, who is the poiētēs?
Exactly. Who is the maker? So let's look at how a thinker like Plato used the concept of poiē to explain the origins of the universe.
So to really understand Plato here, we have to look at his most famous dialogue on this, which is the Timaeus.
Right.
Plato uses the word poiē to describe the actions of what he calls the demiurge.
The demiurge, which translates roughly to what?
It roughly means the craftsman or like the public worker. But here is the thing. The mechanics of how this demiurge operates are fundamentally radically different from the biblical account of creation.
Because they don't believe in making something from nothing, right?
Exactly. In Plato's mind, the concept of something coming from nothing, what theologians call creatio ex nihilo, that is logically impossible to a Greek.
Right, because in their framework, matter is just an eternal given. It's just always been there.
Always.
You can't have an empty room and suddenly, poof, a chair just appears out of thin air.
It is exactly the opposite of thin air. For Plato, before the demiurge does anything at all, there is already this chaotic, messy, just formless stuff swirling around in the universe.
This floating there.
Yeah, it's eternal, just like the God is eternal. So the demiurge doesn't speak this matter into existence.
I don't say let there be matter.
No, not at all. Instead, he looks up at these eternal, perfect ideas, what Plato calls the forms, and he acts as a cosmic carpenter.
Okay, a cosmic carpenter.
He takes the chaotic raw material that's just lying around, and he imposes order onto it, shaping it to resemble those perfect ideas as best as he possibly can.
So let's visualize the philosophical consequence of that. If the Greek god is just taking pre-existing chaotic matter and arranging it,
Right.
he's less like a true creator and more like, I don't know, a cosmic interior decorator.
That is a great analogy.
Like, he didn't build the house, he didn't pour the foundation or raise the walls or put on the roof. He just walked into this chaotic, messy room, probably sighed, and started arranging the furniture to make it look as nice as possible.
The interior decorator analogy works perfectly, actually, because it highlights the fundamental limitation of the demiurge.
Because a decorator is limited by the room.
Exactly. An interior decorator is totally constrained by the room they are given. If the room has a weird, crooked alcove or a sloping floor, the decorator just has to work around it. They can't fix the structure.
To just throw a rug over it.
Right. And in Plato's worldview, the material itself is stubborn. It is inherently prone to decay and imperfection.
It's bad material.
Exactly. Therefore, if the world is flawed, if there is disease or a natural disaster or a deformed animal, it's not necessarily a reflection on the demiurge's skill.
Oh, wow. So God gets a pass.
He totally gets a pass. It's just the fault of the poor, stubborn materials he had to work with. He did his best, but matter is just tricky.
But doesn't that inherently strip the divine of ultimate sovereignty? I mean, think about it. If there is something eternal, completely outside of God, like this chaotic matter, and God is actually constrained by its stubbornness, then God isn't actually the supreme authority over all reality.
He's not.
He's just a manager. He's just a guy trying to keep a lid on things. That feels like a very, very small view of the divine.
It is an incredibly limited view, and it creates a very stark dualism in Greek thought.
The physical versus the spiritual.
Right. The physical material world is seen as lower, messier, and just inherently problematic. While the pure intellectual realm of ideas is supreme, Plato even suggests at one point that the supreme god delegates the really messy business of making human bodies to lesser gods.
Wait, really? He subcontracts it out.
He absolutely subcontracts it, essentially to keep his own hands clean from the grime of physical matter.
Wow. So he delegates the dirty work so he can just stay in the ivory tower of pure thought.
Exactly.
And from the research, it seems like as Greek philosophy sort of evolved into Stoicism later on, the idea of a transcendent creator faded even further away.
Oh, it practically disappears. If we jump forward a few centuries, past Plato to a Stoic philosopher like Epictetus.
Right, one of the famous Stoics.
Yeah, the use of poiēo to describe a past creation event is almost non-existent in his writings. The Stoics just weren't interested in a god who stood outside of time and made the world like a carpenter makes a chair.
Why the shift? Were they just less interested in origins? Or did they just not care where stuff came from?
It wasn't that they didn't care. It's because their entire theology shifted to pantheism.
Okay, pantheism. God is everything.
Right. For the Stoics, God is the universe. The divine is this rational principle, this fiery breath, I called it the logos, that literally permeates every single atom of the cosmos.
So God isn't out there. God is in the dirt.
God is the cohesion of the rocks. God is the changing of the leaves. God is the rational mind of a human being. So to talk about God making the world in the past tense using poiēo, it just didn't make sense to them.
Because he didn't make it, he is it.
Exactly. God is eternally sustaining the world from the inside out, rather than making it from the outside.
So in the Greek cultural mindset, if you're living back then, you basically have two main options. Either God is a craftsman struggling to organize eternal chaos, or God is just the universe itself, dwelling inside the material.
Those are your options.
But then the research pivots to what has to be one of the most important translation projects in human history.
The Septuagint.
The Septuagint. And for anyone unfamiliar, the Septuagint, which you'll often see abbreviated as the LXX, is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. It was completed a few centuries before Christ.
Down in Alexandria.
Right, in Egypt. And when the Jewish scholars took their Hebrew scriptures and decided to translate them into the language of Plato and the Stoics, what happened to our word poiē?
It undergoes an absolute revolution. I mean, it is completely hijacked.
Hijacked how?
Well, the translators took this secular, philosophical Greek word and they basically weaponized it against the very culture that invented it.
I love that.
In the Septuagint, The poiē word group is used over 3,200 times.
Over 3,000 times.
Yes. And right out of the gate, in the very opening verses of Genesis 1, they use poiē to translate the Hebrew word bara.
Which is God's unique act of creation.
Right.
So they write, in the beginning, God made poiē, the heavens and the earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of this making are deeply offensive to the Greek mind.
Because it's not a demiurge.
It's not a demiurge at all. Here, there is no pre-existing chaos that God has to wrestle with. There is no eternal matter stubbornly resisting him. God speaks, and the material reality springs into existence out of absolutely nothing. It's staggering.
He is the absolute sovereign poiēs, the maker.
He invented the room. Going back to our analogy, he didn't just arrange the furniture. He invented the wood, the fabric, the space, and the very time the room exists in.
And because he invented it entirely, the Old Testament completely rejects the dualism of the Greeks.
Right, the idea that matter is bad.
Yes. Remember how Plato's God wanted to keep his hands clean from messy matter? The biblical God leans right into it.
He forms man out of the dust of the ground.
Literally gets his hands in the mud. He makes humanity kasaikona theoidis, in the image of God. And most shockingly to the Greek mind, God looks at all this physical material stuff he just made, and he doesn't say, well, I did my best with this garbage.
He declares it very good.
Very good. Matter is not an evil constraint in the Bible. It is a canvas for divine glory.
Okay, let's just pause on that because that is a massive paradigm shift. It completely changes the power dynamic of the universe. If God created everything out of nothing, then there is no stubborn material he has to compromise with.
He is absolutely sovereign over history, over nature, and over humanity. But, I can imagine that for Jewish thinkers living in a heavily Greek-influenced world, like in Alexandria, this absolute sovereignty might have felt a little, embarrassing.
It was very socially awkward for them intellectually.
Because the Greeks were the intellectual elite of the day. And here you are saying, no, our God just speaks things out of nothing and plays in the mud. Right. Did anyone try to soften the blow? Did they try to mash these two incompatible worldviews together to sound more sophisticated?
Oh, absolutely. The research highlights several really fascinating attempts at exactly that kind of syncretism.
Okay, who is doing this?
The most notable example is Philo of Alexandria. He was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who lived right around the time of Jesus.
Okay.
And Philo deeply, deeply loved the Hebrew scriptures, but he also deeply admired Plato.
That sounds like a recipe for a theological disaster.
It is. When you try to blend absolute biblical sovereignty with Greek dualistic philosophy, the mental gymnastics are just staggering.
How does he pull it off? How do you merge a God who makes everything out of nothing with a philosophy that says matter is eternal and inherently slightly bad?
Philo basically tries to split the difference. He argues that God only directly uses poiē for the pure, immaterial realm of ideas.
The blueprints.
The blueprints, exactly.
Yeah.
But when it comes to executing those blueprints in messy physical reality, Philo suggests that God delegates. He uses the logos, or lesser, intermediate beings, to do the actual hands-on creation.
Unbelievable. So he puts God right back in the ivory tower.
He totally does.
He basically says, look, my Greek philosopher friend, the God of Moses, didn't actually get his hands dirty with mud. He's a gentleman. He just came up with the brilliant concepts and had the contractors do all the heavy lifting.
That is the precise mechanism of Philo's compromise. He just couldn't stomach the unmediated intimacy of the Genesis creation account, so he fragmented the whole concept of God's poiē.
Wow.
And the research also points to other mystical texts from that era, like the Hermetica, which push this even further.
The Hermetica, what's their take?
The Hermetic writings suggest that the supreme God only desires things to be, but doesn't actually engage in doing them at all.
Wait, why not? If he wants them to be, why not do it?
Because to do something implies an exertion of effort. And effort implies a lack or a need. And a perfect God cannot have needs.
It is wild to see the lengths people will go to in order to protect their philosophical systems, They would rather invent an entire hierarchy of middle management angels and demiurges than just accept a God who sovereignly and intimately creates the physical world.
It's all to avoid the idea of a God who actually does things in the physical realm.
But establishing that God is the ultimate maker is really only half the story in this deep dive. Because if God is the sovereign poiēs, the next logical question is, What is humanity's role?
Right, the human side of the equation.
This forces us to transition from divine action to human action. And this is where the linguistic study of poiē gets incredibly psychological. I mean, how did the ancient world view our daily actions, our ethical duties, our personal doing?
Well, we have to contrast the secular Greek mindset with the Hebrew mindset all over again.
Okay, let's start with the Greeks.
Let's look at the Stoics, since they were the dominant ethical framework of the Hellenistic world. For a Stoic, human action just wasn't a source of radical existential crisis.
Really? Why not? Because if they believed in living a virtuous life and they talked about virtue all the time, didn't they stress over doing the right thing?
They cared about virtue deeply, yes, but the mechanics of achieving it were considered to be entirely within human power.
Oh, they thought they could do it.
Completely. The core tenet of Stoic ethics is to just live in accordance with nature, because remember, the divine logos permeates the universe. So your job as a human is simply to use your rationality to align your actions with that natural order.
You're just a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. You are a part of the whole. If you act irrationally, you are just going against your own grain.
Okay, so let me try an analogy. For the Greek mind, ethical doing is basically like staying in your lane on the highway.
Okay.
You have a steering wheel, you have eyes. It's a totally doable task. And if you drift into the rumble strip, you don't panic. You just calmly course correct and get back in the lane. There isn't this existential terror that the highway commissioner is going to swoop down and strike you dead for crossing the white line. You just adjust and keep driving.
That captures the Stoic tranquility perfectly. They believed the human will was fundamentally unbroken and totally capable of executing the right actions.
No sweat.
Right. But when we open the Septuagint and look at how poiēo is used in the Hebrew scriptures, that wide-open casual highway suddenly narrows into an incredibly strict, terrifyingly precise path.
Because in the Old Testament, you aren't just trying to align with some impersonal concept of nature.
No, you are not.
Every single action you take is being weighed and evaluated by a holy, personal, transcendent creator.
And the linguistic data here is just overwhelming. The Septuagint is absolutely saturated with phrases demanding that humanity do the law.
Doing
righteousness, doing justice, doing the commandments of Yahweh. And conversely, it is constantly warning against doing sin, doing evil, doing abominations.
The pressure of that is just staggering if you really think about it. Let's think about this practically. If I am an ancient Israelite, my poiēos isn't just about whether I'm being a generally rational person like the Greeks thought.
It's much deeper than that.
It involves what specific fabrics I wear. It dictates exactly how I plant my fields. It tells me exactly what I can and cannot do on a Saturday, what I eat, how I wash my hands. My entire physical existence is subject to a constant divine audit.
And this raises the central psychological question of the whole research stack. What happens to the human mind under that kind of relentless microscopic scrutiny?
It has to crack eventually.
It does. And the sources trace a very clear historical arc of this happening. In the earlier periods of the Old Testament, there is what the scholars call a naivety of action.
A naivety, meaning they actually thought they could pull it off.
Exactly that. There was this confident assumption, God gave us the law is good, and therefore we can totally do it. And if we mess up, well, there's the sacrificial system to make atonement, but fundamentally, obedience is an achievable thing.
But I'm guessing that didn't last.
No. As history marches forward, especially into the period of Rabbinic Judaism in the apocalyptic era.
Which is roughly the centuries right before and after the life of Jesus, right?
Yes. That naive confidence just shatters completely.
Why does it shatter? Is it because they keep getting conquered by foreign empires like Babylon and Rome? And I start thinking, man, we must really be failing at doing the law, otherwise God would protect us.
That geopolitical trauma is a massive part of it, absolutely. The exile in Babylon forced a deep, painful introspection. They realized that casual obedience just wasn't enough. So to ensure they never incurred God's wrath like that again, they began to build a hedge around the law.
A hedge? So they made rules to protect the rules.
Exactly. And this leads to an explosion of casuistry.
Okay, let's define casuistry for a second, because that is a vital concept for this deep dive. It's essentially the hyper-detailed tracking of every single rule and the invention of new rules to prevent you from accidentally breaking the original rules, right?
That is exactly it. It is the absolute micromanagement of human action. And nowhere is this seen more clearly than in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes, produced by the Essene community at Qumran. The research zeroes in heavily on this group. They separated themselves from mainstream society, went out into the desert, and dedicated their entire existence to the flawless execution of the Torah.
Okay, so if we compare the Qumran community to something a modern listener might understand, it feels a bit like the most toxic extremes of modern cancel culture or social media morality.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel.
Right, where everyone is terrifyingly vigilant about using exactly the right words, having exactly the right opinions, and publicly demonstrating their ideological purity at all times.
Yes, the constant performance.
But except for the Essenes, it wasn't about avoiding a Twitter mob. It was about avoiding the wrath of the Almighty God.
Which is infinitely higher stakes, and the psychological toll of that vigilance is just devastating.
It has to be.
The Qumran texts, like their community rule document, reveal a group of people who are just obsessively tracking their own purity. They had rules for exactly how far you could walk on the Sabbath without it counting as work. They had rules for how to prepare food, how to wash.
Every minute of the day.
But the tragedy is that the harder they tried to perfect their poiēo, the more profoundly they realized their own internal corruption.
Because they could see the hypocrisy.
They were attempting to achieve holiness through meticulous action, but it just bred an atmosphere of sheer terror and anxiety.
It's the ultimate paradox. The closer you get to the magnifying glass of God's perfection, the more you see the microscopic flaws in your own doing. You realize your motives are tainted, even when your actions look totally compliant on the outside.
You realize you are broken on the inside.
So, did this realization lead to them giving up? What happens next?
It led to a profound, literally paralyzing despair. The sources highlight an incredibly moving quote from an apocalyptic Jewish text called For Ezra.
For Ezra. When was that written?
To set the context, For Ezra was written shortly after the Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70 AD.
Oh, wow. So right after the ultimate catastrophe.
Yes. The Jewish people were grappling with unimaginable grief. They had tried so hard to do the law, and yet their holy city was ashes. And the author of For Ezra looks at this catastrophe, traces it all the way back to the fall in Eden, and just cries out in agony, "Oh, tu quid facisti, Adam?"
Oh, Adam, what have you done?
Yes. It is a wail of absolute defeat. The author realizes that ever since Adam's original corrupted action, humanity's ability to do the right thing is terminally broken.
It's infected.
The burden of perfect poiēo led them to the inescapable conclusion of human inability. They realized the game was rigged by their own corrupted nature. They were trapped.
Oh, Adam, what have you done? Man, that is heartbreaking. It's the cry of a humanity that has spent thousands of years meticulously keeping score, only to realize the scoreboard is broken and they are losing by 1,000,000 points.
There is no way to catch up.
Every single attempt to earn their way to God has just collapsed into ashes. And it is precisely into this moment of maximum historical and psychological despair that the New Testament arrives.
And it fundamentally overhauls the entire system.
We have to talk about how Jesus handles this. Because Jesus steps into a culture that is drowning in casuistry, obsessed with merit, and totally paralyzed by the anxiety of doing. How does he address this broken concept of poiēo?
What is so brilliant about Jesus' teaching method is that he uses the exact language of secular, everyday poiēo to completely subvert Jewish expectations of religious merit.
How so?
Well, he tells parables about workers, managers, and financial transactions. But the math in his stories never adds up the way a legalist would want it to.
Okay, let's look at the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, because that perfectly targets this issue. It is the perfect example. In that parable, a master hires workers early in the morning to work in his vineyard. They agree on a wage of 1 denarius for the day.
A standard day's wage.
Right. And these men are out there doing the heavy lifting, sweating in the blistering heat all day long. As the day goes on, the master hires more people at different hours.
Midday, afternoon.
Exactly. Finally, at the 11th hour, just before quitting time, he hires a final group. They barely work for 1 hour in the cool of the evening. But when it comes time to pay them, the master gives the latecomers a full denarius.
Which is shocking.
It is. And when the guys who worked all day step up, expecting to be paid much more because of their extensive doing, they receive the exact same single denarius.
I mean, if you are a Pharisee or an Essene from Qumran who spent your entire life strictly policing your own behavior, that story is the ultimate slap in the face.
It makes them furious.
It destroys the entire equation of merit. Jesus is actively polemicizing against the idea that your poiēo obligates God to reward you.
He takes the concept of doing to earn and turns it entirely on its head to establish the sovereign generosity of God. God distributes his grace, not according to our human calculations of who worked the hardest, but according to his own good pleasure.
But wait, let's explore attention here, because I can hear someone pushing back. If Jesus is destroying the idea of earning merit through works, why does he seem to make the rules even harder in other places?
You're thinking of the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly. In the Sermon on the Mount, he doesn't say, hey guys, the law's too tough, let's just relax and enjoy grace. He actually pushes the demands to impossible heights.
He really does.
He says, you have heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you, if you are angry with your brother, you are in danger of hell. That doesn't sound like relief. That sounds like pouring gasoline on the fire of Qumran's anxiety.
It seems contradictory until you understand the mechanism of what Jesus is doing. He isn't giving them a new ladder to climb. He is intentionally breaking the rungs of the ladder they're currently on.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking. It's like the religious leaders of the time built this massive, complicated treadmill.
Okay, treadmill.
And they're telling the people, if you just run fast enough, if your stride is perfect, if you track your miles meticulously, you will eventually reach the destination of God's favor.
That's the Pharisaical system.
Right. And the people are sweating, exhausting themselves, desperate to reach the end. Then Jesus walks up to the treadmill. But he doesn't offer them a better pair of running shoes or a sports drink. Instead, he reaches down and cranks the speed dial up to a completely impossible pace, like 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yes. The standard of absolute internal perfection, not just external compliance.
Right. So the treadmill is spinning so fast that everyone goes violently flying off the back.
They can't keep up.
They're lying on the floor, bruised, exhausted, realizing they can never run that fast. And while they are lying there in the realization of their total inability, Jesus essentially points out that the treadmill was never actually plugged into anything that could move them forward. The very vehicle of human doing was never capable of transporting them into the divine presence. By making the law impossible to keep, he forces them to abandon the treadmill entirely.
That is a phenomenal way to understand it. Jesus routes the doer away from their own effort, forcing them to rely entirely on God's sovereign, unmerited giving.
He strips it all away.
He does. He tells another story in Luke 17 where a servant works out in the field all day, comes inside, and still has to prepare dinner for his master. Jesus says, does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty.
So even perfect obedience wouldn't earn anything.
Jesus utterly strips away all claims of merit. Even if we could achieve perfect obedience, which we can't, it wouldn't put God in our debt.
So Jesus exposes the futility of the treadmill. But it's the Apostle Paul who comes along a few decades later, takes a theological sledgehammer, and just smashes the unplugged machine to absolute pieces.
He obliterates it.
Because the research spends a massive amount of time on Paul's linguistic use of poiē.
Paul provides the systematic, devastating theological critique of works. And you have to remember, he was a Pharisee himself.
Right, he was the guy tracking the miles.
He knew the treadmill intimately. He was the best runner they had. But in his letters, especially to the Romans and the Galatians, Paul takes aim at a very famous Old Testament text, Leviticus 18.5.
What does that one say?
It basically says, the person who does these things shall live by them. For centuries, this was the foundational proof text for the way of works.
The logic seems sound to a legalist. If you do the law, you get life. A simple transaction.
Simple in theory, disastrous in practice. Paul points out the fatal mechanical flaw in the human engine. In Galatians 3, Paul argues that if you're going to rely on the law for your justification before God, you are obligated to do all of it.
All of it.
Flawlessly, from birth to death, without a single internal or external slip-up. And because no human being possesses the capacity for flawless execution, relying on the law doesn't bring life. It brings a curse.
Because you're guaranteed to fail.
Exactly. The research quotes Romans 2.13, where Paul makes this incredibly stark statement. He basically says, there are no true poietai, no true doers of the law. We all fail. Everyone is guilty.
So the category of doer of the law is actually an empty set.
It's completely empty. Paul creates an absolute contrast between the poiē of the law and the righteousness that comes by faith. He makes it unequivocally clear that human doing is utterly bankrupt as a means of salvation.
It's worse than useless.
It is. Any attempt to use our works to reach God is not just foolish. It is an attempt to steal God's glory. It results in spiritual boasting, and boasting is entirely excluded by the gospel.
Let's press into that for a second because I can hear someone pushing back on Paul, like really pushing back.
Sure.
If our doing is totally bankrupt, and if Jesus and Paul have completely destroyed the idea that our moral efforts earn us anything, well, what is stopping society from descending into chaos?
This is a classic objection.
Right. Is Paul just promoting lawlessness? If works don't save me, why shouldn't I just sin all I want so that grace can abound?
That is the exact accusation Paul's critics leveled against him, and he anticipates it brilliantly. Paul is not promoting lawlessness. He is functioning like a spiritual oncologist.
An oncologist, how so?
He is diagnosing a terminal illness that humanity refused to acknowledge. He is exposing that the human ego, the human will, is completely overpowered by a foreign occupier, sin.
So we aren't even free to do good.
No. He talks about this agonizing reality in Romans 7. It's one of the most relatable psychological portraits in all of ancient literature.
Oh, where he says, "For I do not do the good I want."
But the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing.
Man, everyone has felt that.
It is the portrait of a fractured will. The law itself is holy, righteous, and good. Paul doesn't hate the law. The problem isn't the law, the problem is the material.
Going back to our earlier analogy, the blueprint is perfect, but the wood is completely rotten.
The wood is rotten. We are, as Paul says, sold under sin. Therefore, true action, righteous action that actually pleases God, cannot originate from our own corrupted flesh.
It just can't. You can't build a strong house with rotten wood.
It requires a completely different power source.
Yes. It requires the supernatural intervention of the Holy Spirit.
Which is why faith isn't the rejection of good works. It is a completely new paradigm for understanding them. Faith is the posture of a beggar receiving a gift.
It's empty hands.
Exactly. It is an obedience that renounces all boasting about what it achieves because it recognizes that the ability to do anything good is itself a gift from God.
Which I think provides the perfect logical bridge to the next major revelation in the research.
Yeah.
Because if our own poiē is a dead end for salvation, and if our will is terminally fractured, well, how is the Christian supposed to live and act?
Where do good works actually come from?
Exactly. Where do they come from? The sources turn to the Gospel of John to explain the mechanics of this new life.
John is so helpful here. He offers a profound theology of origin. For John, what a person does is an infallible indicator of whose child they are. Action is spiritual DNA.
Okay, let's unpack that. Action as DNA.
John uses the phrase hamartian poiēn doing sin. He argues that if your life is characterized by the continuous practice of sin, it proves a corrupt origin. It proves you don't actually belong to God.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Jesus says this to the religious leaders in John 8 in a devastating critique. They claim Abraham is their father, but Jesus says, you are doing the works of your father, the devil.
Wow, that is severe. He is looking at the people who consider themselves the most morally upright, the people tracking all their miles on the treadmill and telling them their spiritual DNA is actually demonic.
Because their doing is entirely self-righteous, and it rejects the Savior standing right in front of them.
It is severe, but the flip side of that reality is glorious. If bad fruit proves a bad root, how do we get good fruit?
Right, how do we change the DNA?
John records the words of Jesus in chapter 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit.
The famous vine passage.
Yes. And then he delivers the killing blow to human self-sufficiency. For apart from me, you can do nothing.
And the Greek phrasing there is fascinating, according to the notes. Ουδάινες the poiēn auden.
But what does that mean exactly?
It is a double negative for emphasis. You have absolutely no power to do a single thing of spiritual value outside of an organic union with Christ.
It's no power at all.
None. Good works are not produced by gritting your teeth and trying harder. They are the natural sap flowing from the vine into the branches.
So it's not a struggle, it's a byproduct of the connection.
Exactly.
Okay, this tension has been building through the entire study today. We've seen humanity crushed under the weight of trying to be the poietos, the maker of their own righteousness. But here is where the linguistic journey hits its absolute climax.
Oh, this is the best part.
You sent us a specific note in the research regarding Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. And it is arguably one of the most stunning lexical reversals in all of literature.
It is breathtaking.
Up until this point, we've seen this word family used for the anxious, burdensome weight of human performance. How does Paul flip the script in Ephesians?
He takes a cognate of this heavy, exhausting verb, poiēs, and he uses the noun form poiēma.
Poiēma.
Poiēma means workmanship, masterpiece, or creation. But out of the hundreds of times this word group could be used to demand our performance, Paul applies it to our identity.
Our identity.
He writes, "For we are his poiēma, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them."
We are not the makers of our salvation. We are the made.
Just let the relief of that wash over you. Think about the historical journey we just took, all the philosophical anxiety of the Greeks trying to organize chaos,
Right.
all the crushing, terrifying casuistry of the rabbis at Qumran,
Yes.
all the agonizing despair of the author of 4 Ezra. It all evaporates in the single word, poiēma.
Wow.
You are not the craftsman. You are not the artist desperately trying to carve yourself out of marble to make something acceptable to the divine. You are the canvas.
We are the clay.
You are the clay. God is the sovereign, gracious poiēs, and you are his masterpiece.
That reframes the entire universe. It takes the burden of self-creation and shifts it entirely back onto the shoulders of the Almighty. But Paul doesn't stop there.
He doesn't.
He still mentions good works.
Ooh.
He says we were created for good works. So how does this differ from the legalism we were just condemning?
The difference is entirely in the sequencing. The order is a matter of life and death.
Okay, explain the sequence.
We are not saved by good works. We are saved for good works. And look at the astonishing detail Paul adds here. These works were prepared beforehand by God.
He paved the road before we even got there.
Precisely. Even the good that we do as Christians is entirely a result of his prior doing. We're simply walking into the spaces, the opportunities, and the grace that he already laid out for us.
It is the ultimate expression of grace.
It is. The burden of generating righteousness from within our own bankrupt resources is completely lifted.
It is a total breath of fresh air. It's the ultimate liberation. If you truly grasp that you are God's poiēma, you never have to posture, you never have to perform or panic again. Your standing before the creator of the universe is secured by his craftsmanship, not yours.
It's finished.
But as we transition into the final part of this deep dive, the research reveals something deeply, deeply troubling about human psychology.
Yeah, we have a fatal flaw.
We don't actually like grace, do we? It offends our pride. We want to be in control. We want the credit. And we see how quickly the early church forgot this radical freedom.
It is the great tragedy of church history, really. The linguistic data tracks this word group past the New Testament and into the post-apostolic age.
So the generation after the apostles.
Right, the writings of the early church fathers, specifically texts like 2 Clement and the Didache, and what we witness is a rapid, horrifying drift backward.
How quickly did they lose the plot?
Within a generation or two. Moving into the late 1st and 2nd centuries, the radical Pauline dismantling of human action fades into the background. The church begins to drift back into moralism.
Why? Did it just seem too easy?
The leaders started looking at the rigorous demands of Christian living, and they slowly reverted to a legalistic understanding of poiēo.
The research quotes the Didache, which was an early church manual. It says, if you can bear the whole yoke of the Lord, you will be perfect. But if you cannot, do what you can.
Do what you can.
When you first hear that, it sounds incredibly reasonable. It sounds pastoral, right? Hey, just do what you can. But logically, that is the exact slippery slope that leads right back to Qumran.
It totally does.
It introduces a sliding scale of merit.
It absolutely does. It resurrects the treadmill. Suddenly, doing the right things became a transactional means to earn merit again. It became a way to ensure that your prayers were answered or that you achieved a higher status in the kingdom.
So works became a currency again.
Yes. In the text of 2 Clement, we find them reverting entirely to Old Testament logic, literally writing, if we do righteousness before God, we shall enter his kingdom.
They just picked up the burden Paul died trying to lift from them.
Yeah.
It is so frustrating to read the history. It's like watching a prisoner whose cell door has been thrown wide open by a full pardon.
Right.
And they walk out, they look around at the sunlight, and then they voluntarily walk back into the cell and lock it behind them because the freedom is too intimidating.
It is intimidating because grace requires the death of the ego.
Oof.
To accept that you are a poiēma means you have to admit you are entirely helpless on your own. And human nature violently resists that admission.
He hate it. I can't help but look at this ancient error and see how heavily it still plagues us today. We naturally revert to a transactional relationship, even within the church, but certainly in secular culture.
Oh, all the time.
If I do X, the universe owes me Y. If I put in the work, I deserve the reward. We hate being the artwork. We desperately want to be the artist. We want to sign our own name at the bottom of the canvas of our lives.
We want to be our own creators. But the historical and linguistic data we've reviewed today proves an immutable law of the spiritual universe. Every time humanity tries to rely on its own poiē, every single time it tries to justify itself through its own doing,
It ends in disaster.
it ends in anxiety, casuistry, exhaustion, and ultimately despair. True freedom, the only lasting peace, is found when we surrender our obsession with doing and trust completely in God's sovereign making.
Let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on today. We started with Plato's demiurge, a limited cosmic interior decorator, just rearranging the eternal chaos, completely disconnected from the messy reality of human life.
A small god.
Right. And then we walked through the revolution of the Septuagint, where the ultimate sovereign God creates matter out of nothing, declaring it good, but where the crushing weight of his perfect law fell upon human action.
The great
We felt the terror of Qumran, the panic of Jewish legalism, and the agonizing despair of Adam's failure in 4 Ezra.
What have you done?
And then we witnessed the liberating devastation of the gospel. Jesus cranking the treadmill to an impossible speed to expose its complete futility.
breaking the system.
Paul diagnosing our fractured will and destroying the illusion that our works could ever bridge the infinite gap. And finally, the glorious revelation that we are not the artisans, we are the art.
The masterpiece.
From poiē as an impossible human burden to poiēma as a divine grace-filled status.
The shift in a single Greek word perfectly mirrors the transition from death to life. It is the transition from works to grace.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. As we established at the beginning, modern culture is constantly shouting at you to make something of yourself.
Every single day.
You are bombarded with the pressure to be your own creator, your own poiēos. From climbing the corporate ladder, to curating your social media image, to proving you have the most culturally acceptable moral standing, the world tells you that your right to exist is determined by what you produce.
It's an endless treadmill.
But what if the ultimate freedom isn't found in what you can painstakingly do or make? What if you stop trying to carve yourself into something acceptable? The next time you feel the crushing anxiety of the checklist, the panic of falling behind, I want you to remember Ephesians 2:10.
We are his workmanship.
What if true peace is found in fully resting in the reality that in Christ the work is already finished and you are already God's poiēma?
That changes the foundation of everything we do.
It really does. Thank you for sending us this incredible research, and thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Until next time.